why did I create the tool? I think through frustration, through the ability to include more people in engaging and collaborative conversations. I worked with a lot of big consultancies who used to do a lot of really clever, deep work, but then they would expect colleagues to get on board. Like towards the end, it's almost like a telling and get the colleagues on board when the work's being done. And that didn't seem to make any sense to me. I wanted to do it the other way around, get everybody involved in the conversation. And then I felt everything that came downstream was a lot easier. The way I did that was I used to do lots of doodles in my book, the day book that I've got in front of me with my lovely favorite pen. And I used to use certain symbols to represent what I considered key things. These then subsequently became the big picture symbols, of which there aren't that many: team, customer, technology, measure, money, and process. And that creates a magical moment in a conversation, which is if you're furnishing people with these physically, either this big or these poker chips here, they will make connections, because we have this like primal, visceral need to want to work with our hands and connect things together. So when people make a connection that they may not have thought of previously, and maybe you might have that same experience this afternoon with people who some of you have not met before. And if we're doing that for you all, maybe that's something we could do with your team. I realized a few years ago that the tool itself wasn't really the big thing. The big thing is working out what engagement and collaboration means for change, strategy, finance, learning, onboarding, and performance. So we've now got a service wrap around that. We're just resetting the proposition this year with our specialist partners, two of which are in the room today, Bryce and Richard. And that will mean that for each of the different offer areas, we explain how exactly we can do what we do better, because we use big picture as the engagement and collaboration tool. Now, quite controversially, I don't see that as being good enough, i.e. we're not just a change or a strategy consultancy or service provider. It's really how we combine those offers. I think the problems that clients face are a combination, the solutions of a combination of those offers. So if we fix something in strategy, it'd be good to know what change is going to result. There could be an onboarding to learning. There could be a learning to performance. So we very much see this as a moving feast, and our ability to join together those solutions in innovative ways is what we set out to do. We will happily help you deploy big picture in the way that I've explained in terms of the solutions.
What we are looking at today is a case study, which is obviously an artificial one. It's a company that's trying to become more virtual, becoming an anywhere organization. And we all heading that way, whether we like it or not. And they have been through some turmoil because of supply chain issues, as have many companies around the world this past year. And that has impacted their finances, and their people are all very stressed, as we all are. And they have decided to give up their head office, and they've decided to stop manufacturing any products. They are going to use contract manufacturers henceforth. And they want to now service the entire European market. They're already servicing some parts of it, but they've decided they want to be brave and go even further. Someone called Jeremy Evans, who's the brother of the CEO, and he's in charge of making sure that marketing and sales happen. And he's sitting with one of the challenges, which is that you have to supply anywhere in Europe. So he's having to apply his mind to that. Then across to the right, we've got Benita Khan, and she's got a dedicated role in the space of supply chain. She sits with another one of the challenges, which is the extended supply chain, and the fact that, in inverted commas, own ex-manufacturer, they've decided to sell off to the management their only remaining manufacturing unit, and it's one that makes their most important brands. So she's going to have to wrestle with that. And then if we come down the hill a bit, we'll find that we've got a number of other people that are on the board. So on the left here with I've just put with Jennifer Evans, who's the CEO, one of her challenges is where are we going, quo vadis, but also she's having to relinquish manufacturing. But they're a pioneering organization in this space. And then we've got Peter Jenkins, who is the HR person, and he's got issues of trying to help his people who are all suffering stress and strain. Below him, Jane Arbuthnot, who looks after the IT systems. And the IT systems are very compromised. Something like 60% of American companies have had major cyber attacks in the past year. And a lot of them have had ransomware payments, and including meat suppliers and people that supply gas and so on. So it's been a very dramatic time. And one of the challenges when people work remotely, they indulge in what's called shadow IT, which means they use anything that comes their way, and it all risks compromising the overall system. So that's a challenge area. And we've got then Trevor Evans, who is the financial person below that. He's got to come up with a funding proposal, and he has to rebuild the balance sheet for the company. And Jane, who's the IT person on his right, is wrestling with the whole issue of IT. So it's quite a challenged environment. It's a company that wants to go forward. It's stated that it wants to be operating from anywhere, supplying customers anywhere in Europe. So that was what an anywhere organization could look like. They've given up their head office just literally as we start the case study, and now everyone's going to work remotely.
So I think I would always start here with a question to the to Jennifer and her team. And my question would be, given what you've done, I'd be interested to know what it is you thought you were good at before you did that. That what you're good at is managing all these pieces and putting them together, and therefore it doesn't matter what you're in as a line of business, as a sector, you could be good at anything that has an opportunity for virtuality. What they did was driven by the purpose, or what they have done has in effect given them a new purpose.
A concern, or perhaps they've noted the extended supply chain is interesting, because in my opinion, there are both ups and downs here. There's opportunities and there's disadvantages. That now they're using suppliers around the world. The suppliers may change from time to time, and this may cause a problem with the supply chain. It shouldn't, if they're using good shipping lines, good clearing agents, and so forth. If they have international retail outlets and they're using a decent global supply chain, this could well reduce the cost of the goods. There's e-commerce there, which opens the opportunity for them to go to some of the countries like Mauritius, which they are duty-free zones, where they can actually use those to have their warehousing for their e-commerce and avoid having to tie up capital in things like duty.
I think people now are also extending the word resilient to supply chain. They're saying that you need a resilient supply chain. It needs to be able to bounce back from these kind of things.
There is, was it Richard earlier who said, there's a question on where you are now. I think there's another question of what is it actually you want to do in the future? And you've just touched on having a proper strategy. So I would see myself adding value in a number of areas, and they would, and hopefully you can see this, be in the management space, then also in the customer space, the customer care. Now, if we take the management space, there is that question on strategy. So I would create something like a VMOS. So that's vision, missions, objectives, strategies, and tactics. And then for each of the missions, they would then roll up into what the actual strategy was going to be. Around the customer side, it's going to be interesting to understand. So how are these products actually researched by the customers? Do they like to go to the shops first and have look and a touch and a feel, and then go online and look for the best price. If you're selling a product to a retail outlet that's not owned by you, you want to make sure that that retailer meets your criteria, that meets your brand. Regarding your e-commerce and your being able to buy, let's say a washing machine, you've got to be able to do it on any device. So it needs to be almost, omni-channel, and it needs to be as smooth a customer journey as possible.
Within the agile lean framework, now they need to look at an agile sort of contracting for procurement for the supply chain, because they're actually moving out from having themselves manufacturing stuff to actually passing that across to the UK organization. So they need to have some sort of procurement agile contracting put in place, where like they have a minimum basic requirement monthly basis, and then they need to upscale and downscale that requirement.
So I placed myself down in the sort of management near Peter and
Yes.
Jane.
Okay.
So there's a couple of things that kind of jump into mind. So first, the idea that change is both sort of an emotional context as well as a physical context. So the advice I'd be giving to the management team is to make sure that we tend to both. So if you're cleaning up processes, we also need to think about the emotional changes that people are going through. So creating space to kind of celebrate the endings and make that sort of transition into new beginnings, and to kind of either story sharing or creating conversations for people to actually do that is going to be quite important. And I think particularly around like the cybersecurity piece, this is an opportunity to model involving people in the process. So I'd be interested to do maybe some vulnerability testing with colleagues in terms of what are the risks, what are the opportunities, what are, maybe some of those pre-mortems or disaster scenarios, to get people to recognize the potential risks and also start to take some accountability for how they can safeguard their organization and be part of that process. And I think in doing that, you start to bridge that gap between what's happening in the strategy and what can I do differently? How am I involved in this? As people are moving into remote working spaces, there are some new habits and behaviors that they're going to need to create. So what do they need to unlearn? And what sort of habits or behaviors do we want to start practicing that helps to help people migrate into the new way of working?
Scarcity type model, which is there's something in the top 3 spots and others can come along and displace them, but it means it's a time box conversation rather than one that leads to paralysis, which is we never quite get through to it. So the top 3 are in the top 3 positions as far as I can see, Bryce.
Oh, I was born for this role.
Yes, Rebecca.
So
Rebecca, why have we ignored you?
Fight
You're
corner.
at the bottom of the list, Rebecca. Why are you so quiet? This is your chance to speak up.
This is definitely this I must fight for the people. So I think that tending to the sort of the endings and the new beginnings and the kind of the emotional context for our people is absolutely going to be a top priority, because without our people, what are we? So I think the habits of actually creating the space for people to celebrate and put to bed the fact that the old is no longer, and to use that as an opportunity to think about what do we want to take forward into our new ways of working, what does that mean for us as a group, and to have those sort of very open conversations about the challenges up front rather than waiting for them to occur down the line is going to be absolutely critical to the business. So I would say endings, new beginnings to the top, please.
Yeah, go on then. No, while you do it, Rebecca, it's important you walk to the front, and you've made an impassioned case there to move to the top. And I might be overreaching now in the simulation, given that none of us want to pretend to fall out, but imagine in a room, Austin is now, he may be knocked out. I think he's brooding there. Something has happened in Austin's world.
His V2 motor's taken a hit.
I have absolutely no problem with people and endings and new beginnings being
There's
in
a
the
book
top
coming.
three. Being in the top three. However, let's have a party and not know where we're going or where the next bottle of wine's going to come. So you need you need a VMOS. So part of the people strategy. So you would have a people strategy, and within your people strategy, you would have a new beginnings mission and an endings mission. So it is critically important. But it's like the primary colors. Here we go. It's like the primary colors. You need, so the first three should be people, your strategy, and a handle on your technology. And once you've got those three primary things, then we can party and celebrate and commiserate. But other than, if we don't know where we're going, what's the point of us being here?
Wow.
Yeah, you need to
I
give it a
would
structure.
agree with that, but I would say that if you put the people first, then you create opportunities that will inform your strategy. So you can have a sort of an idea in terms of this is a direction we want to go, and you can involve your people in helping to populate that detail through that early conversation in terms of what do we want to take forward from the old into the new. And from that, kind of developing to devise a strategy that involves people and makes them feel part of it and connected to it.
The answer is to let the people develop the vision, the value, the mission, the objectives, and the strategies collaboratively on the big picture board, and then you will have helped them through the endings and the new beginnings, and you would have made Austin happy because you would have a shared value vision. Because often they're what I call words on the wall. You go into big corporates, they've got all these things under non-reflective glass in original oak frames, and nobody knows what they mean and what they stand for, because consultants help them develop it in a weekend away with the top management team. So I think if you did a collaborative approach, you could meet Rebecca's and Austin's needs, hopefully, in a collaborative way.
It felt like we've landed into a fairly realistic conversation for a fictional company where we don't really have a vested interest. However, we've been able to apply our knowledge and experience to it. So my wrap-up points, I don't script these in advance, they just come to me as we're talking through. So hopefully they'll be topical and relevant, if not textbook kind of stuff. I'm going to go back to front. The last thing we've done there in choosing three opportunities at the top, and I'll pull the share off for now just so we're talking together. The three things at the top allow us some wriggle room, so we would probably apply, so we would agree some criteria as to how we were choosing those things. Interestingly, Austin touched on, I think, close to the people, process, system type thing, maybe pick one from each. As long as we agreed that framework and criteria, that always helps encourage, well, we've got 3 slots and this is the criteria we're going to choose. I mentioned scarcity in passing, but I think it's really important, which is if we're physically in a room, I've only got 2 poker chips for opportunities here. I don't know where my third one is, might be on the board behind me. But the fact is, scarcity is wonderful in focusing attention. And if you've got people physically in the room, if you have 3 on the table, I mentioned to Austin earlier, I often refer to it as windowsill facilitation. You give people the props and the meaning behind it, and then they will have it out. Clearly, it's got to be within some parameters of professionalism and courtesy and meeting behaviors. But within that, you can actually have quite a lot of fun with that, because it's like displacing the king. One of my favorite project terms is, if we're going to do that, what are we going to stop doing? Because I think we often underestimate, we can just keep adding things into a finite bucket. I loved, by the way, just working back, Manoj's, I hope I pronounced your name right, Manoj. You must
okay.
give me on that. Thank you. Agile approach to contracting, really interesting. And I'm going to link it into one of my other points, which you'll notice on the big picture board. I'll just reshare it. Partners is next to suppliers. So you've got suppliers and partners. And I love this tension between, I'd like to think it was very well thought through at the beginning. They said almost landed on the page, quite randomly, but it's a really powerful pattern. When does the supplier become a partner and a partner becomes a supplier? And I think that agile approach to contracting may suggest there's a different way of seeing or working with, whether it's the contract or just the narrative and the voiceover about how can we work together to achieve an end goal, as opposed to a supplier just providing resources that are then fired and forgot about. So there's a partner versus supplier. Just another couple. Austin's multi-hatted role. So you were in full flow, so I didn't want to jump in. You were moving your team symbol about. That's one way of doing it, but we almost lose some information by doing that. What we encourage is that you identify all the different places you do add value with multiple team symbols. That creates a conversation in itself, which is, isn't that interesting? Austin is adding value in all of those places. Has Austin got the capacity to do that? Is it right? Is that our view? Or should we be focusing Austin in one place? So, and one of the books that I read when I was developing the tool, which was the E-Myth, Entrepreneurial Myth by Michael Gerber, which is about that. Some people have businesses and companies where they do lots of different roles, and it actually isn't good for the business. It's good to focus in one area and then outsource or collaborate on some of the areas. And I'm going to leave you with my last thought, which is, it struck me as we're going through, we are all specialists in our own right, and we bring quite a high level of education and knowledge to this conversation. I'm going to leave it as a rhetorical question. Maybe we'll continue it on into the little discussion after Q2, which is, how would this have been for people who weren't as clued up and have a business background? Because I don't think there's anything on the board or the symbols that preclude or rule out, maybe to Rebecca's point, taking all of the people with us. They may interpret the symbols differently, but they can still use the symbols. They just might not be as complex the connections. But I would like to think, because I see it all of the time, this would be a conversation for everybody in the business, not just those in the senior management team. As an independent or someone who might be a practitioner, there are ways to get up to speed, get some kit and actually try this out. Might need to practice the voiceover and the delivery a little bit, but we can help with that by you attending webinars, reading the Essentials Guide, and later this year, maybe early next year, there'll be a community of practice where you can go in, join with others who are becoming practitioners and find out how they're using Big Picture, the tool, to do certain things. And if you are involved in a business and a company, an organization who may benefit from this kind of conversation, which has generated 10 to 15 opportunities in 45 minutes, with a bit of cleaning up here, a bit of tidying, we would have ended up with something top three.